Welcome to the channel. This video is going to be a redo on one of my older ones from a few years ago on soldering holes up, fixing bullet holes without welding. And I know there's probably new viewers out there that maybe haven't gone back, watched some of my old stuff. So I'm going to cover this stuff again, maybe a little bit more detail, maybe show a little bit better camera angles. And I'll explain why sometimes it's a better option to use solder as opposed to MIG welding or brazing or just filling the holes in with Bondo. So let's get started. Some of my clips may sound kind of tinny. Well, it's about 90 degrees outside in the shop. So I moved into the office. I can turn my air conditioning on. All right, I got a fender here and it's got an assortment of holes in it. These are 1/8" holes, some down here, some up here. These are 3/8" holes, and these are bullet holes. Once again, somehow I managed to get bullet holes in my fender. Sometimes solder may be a better option than welding it up. You know, if you take a MIG welder, and you could weld this up pretty good. These wouldn't be too hard to weld up with a MIG welder. These would be very easy, and these can be done also, but you do a lot of damage with the heat. And let me flip this fender over. This is actually the fender I did a video on welding holes up with a MIG welder, and we'll take a look at the heat effect zone and what it does on the backside. And there's quite a bit of damage. The heat effect zone spreads out quite a bit. It burns a lot of the E-coat off, the galvanized. So every once in a while I'll solder stuff up, and I'm going to walk you through that process. I think I started soldering holes up back in the 80s, and back then pull rods were used quite a bit. They're really common, and that's what it's for. Some guys would just drill a hole, use a pull rod, and they just fill it with Bondo. And I didn't like that, and I didn't like really trying to weld the hole up or braze it up. You just did a lot of damage from the heat. So I decided to start soldering the holes up that way. And I'd done a video just on how these pull rods work, and somebody commented, said you shouldn't be drilling holes in cars. Well, I agree, but people shouldn't be wrecking their cars either. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So solder, in my opinion, was a pretty good alternative to welding it up or just putting Bondo in the hole. And I'm going to explain the pros and cons using the solder, different types of solder, what the flux does, all that. But that's where it started, and I didn't really think it was anything special. I just soldered the holes up like that and move on. And later on, I figured out I could do it with bullet holes and everything else. So every once in a while, there's just a better option to solder stuff up. Okay, this is my main soldering gun here. It's a welding.D550, and it's 240/325 watts. And these are a dual range soldering gun. When you depress the trigger part way, you'll get the lower heat. You pull it back all the way, you'll get the higher heat. I've also got a smaller unit. Let me grab that. Okay, this is also a welding.D550, but it's a 260 or 200 watts, and I haven't used this one in a long time. It might have been too light to use on some of the heavier sheet metal, but I don't know if I've used this in a while, so I'm going to try it. The sheet metal today is pretty thin, so it takes less heat to heat it up. I'm going to try this on some of the smaller holes and see how it works. And I don't know if the bigger wattage soldering gun is even available anymore. I'll have to look on Amazon. And whatever I can find, the solder and different things I'm going to show, I'll put a link to it. Here's the solder I use right here. And I buy this just at a big box store or a lumber yard. It's Odie brand, and it's 95/5 lead-free acid core wire solder. And this is basically just used for plumbing and sheet metal repair, and this is what I've been using for years. But now the only thing with this stuff, the acid core, that acid can be corrosive. You don't use it on anything electrical, so that's sometimes a concern on the back side, but I don't think it'd be any worse than just having bare metal exposed. I did a video several years ago, and I soldered some holes up, and I took the fender and I didn't clean it up, didn't do anything to it, and I set it outside for almost 6 months. And when I looked at the back side, and I think I showed that on a video too, there was no corrosion back there. Now here's a rosin core solder, and this is for electrical use. This is Odie. Part number is 53175. This is what you're going to use for any type of electrical repairs. And I'm going to try this stuff on some of these holes and see how it works. Usually when you buy this stuff, it's super thin. This is actually a heavier one that I have, and it may work okay for filling these holes. This has a non-corrosive flux in there, so this could be a better option. The first thing you want to do is put a little bevel on these. It gives you a little bit more surface contact for the solder. So I've got a 3/16 drill bit, and I'm just going to countersink these just a little bit. I'm going to start with the smaller soldering gun and see how it works on here. So next thing I want to do, I want to clean up the tip on this. I just take a Scotch-Brite, get some of the oxidation off of here. It looks like almost soot, and I'm using the acid core solder. I want to get some heat in this tip, and then I'm going to heat up the sheet metal. You have to have the surface hot before you can put the solder in there, otherwise your solder is just going to run right off. And we just want to put a thin layer of solder in there. That's called tinning the metal. You want to get a base in there, and actually, as small as these holes are, it actually just filled right in anyway. Let me see if I can do that again so you can just see the tinning effect. That gives you a base layer onto the metal. That way you can tell if it's melted in good. This smaller gun actually works pretty nice. But remember, it's important to get that metal hot first. If you don't, your solder is just going to run off. Next thing you want to do is just take some water on a toothbrush and clean the area. That removes the acid. That has to come off before you can fill it or paint. Okay, next I'm going to try this electrical solder, the rosin core, and see how that works. I'm using the same smaller wattage gun. That worked nice. Now, I don't know if this is water soluble. Doesn't seem to be. It's still on there, so that may take a little Prep-Sol or something to clean up, but it isn't corrosive. Okay, the thing about these bullet holes, it actually bevels all this metal in. It's almost like a funnel. It actually makes it very easy to make a patch and fill this in. So I pre-cut some pieces of sheet metal. This is the same thickness, and these will lay down in there, and being it's kind of countersunk, this will be just a little bit lower than the surface. So once you solder that in and grind it off, it's real easy to fill. I'm going to tin the whole inside of this with the solder, and for this I'm going to use the bigger gun. It's more area to heat up, and this will just work a little bit faster. And I'm using the acid core solder on here. Okay, we've got a nice layer around there. And what I do, I just use a little bit of masking tape. That'll hold it into position. It's a little bit loose, but I'll get a little bit of solder on the patch first. I'll take my pocket pry bar here, hold it in position. I just want to get one side tacked on there. Come down to the bottom and get some on here. And while that solder is hot, I want to make sure I get it seated. Okay, I'm going to start up here. And once you grind it off, you can look and see if you have any pinholes and just go back and fill them in. But that looks pretty good. I'm going to do one more up here. That looks nice. That come out real good. Okay, the last two holes I have are these 3/8, and it's nice and straight here, it's flush. So I'm gonna put one on the back side. Now in this case, say you don't have any access to the back side and you've got to fill this in. Here's a scenario here. Say you just turned 52 years old and you decided that you don't want the wing anymore that you installed on the back of your 98 Buick LeSabre. So here's what we're gonna do. I pre-cut these little pieces of sheet metal. These are a little bit longer than the hole, but they're just a little bit narrower so they'll slide in. I pre-drilled an 1/8 hole in there, and I took a long sheet metal screw and I got it so it'll start in there. I need to hold it, but it can't be too tight. You got to be able to back this screw up fairly easy. I'm going to slide this patch in like that. We're going to use the screw to hold it. I need to put some solder on this patch first before I even put it in there. That way it's got some solder. I can heat it up. It'll stick to it, and I can back the screw out, finish filling it in. So here's what I'm gonna do. Okay. So now I've got to heat up this fender panel so enough heat goes through to warm that solder up. Once that sticks, I can back the screw out and finish filling it in. There we go. Let that cool. I want to get that side tacked in there, let it cool off a little bit, and then I'll finish filling it in. If you get too much heat on here, you'll loosen all the solder up, the patch will fall right out, and you'll have to start over again. Okay, in case you missed it, let's do one more. Like a little pinhole right here. I'm going to solder that in, and then I'm going to take the grinder and grind these off. Okay, I don't see any pinholes. Everything filled in nice. These are nice. They're just a little bit countersunk. This is all flush. Let's take a look at the back side, see how it looks. Okay, here's the back side. These are the small holes. Here's the patches I did with the screw. If you have access to the back, you just cut a small piece and you can use masking tape to hold it in place, solder it in. And here's the bullet holes. Even though none of this stuff is really pretty, it's a little bit prettier than that right there if you'd used a welder. So if you have access to the back and you could spray some wax back here, some undercoating or something to seal it up, all the better. It is an alternative to repair holes this way. So this is just one of the many ways you can use to fill in holes. I don't know if any way is absolutely perfect, but it is an option. So I hope you like this video. Thanks for watching.